After 27 years of unwavering service, I never imagined that the day I was diagnosed with cancer would also be the day they quietly began planning my exit. My name is Daniel Park, and I'm 62 years old. You won't hear my name echo through the halls of Grey Rock Systems anymore, a tech firm based in Austin, Texas, where I served as lead security architect for nearly 3 decades. Retirement was never part of my plan, not because I needed the money, but because I believed I still had something to offer, something big. I was building a system that, if completed, could protect the industry from a level of cyber threat we hadn't even begun to understand. I called it Argus Sentinel, a self-learning security framework capable of identifying and neutralizing threats before they ever manifested. Deep down, I knew this might be the last great project of my career, and maybe even my life. So I gave it everything I had left. My time, my strength, and those long nights where I typed through the pain, ignoring the nausea from another round of chemo. People at the office knew I was sick. They didn't say it out loud, but I saw it in their eyes. Pity, discomfort, sometimes even avoidance. Like cancer was contagious. But what I didn't see coming was that the very people who once shook my hand and praised my dedication were quietly plotting to erase me from my own legacy. And leading that charge was Ethan Morrow, the young, polished CEO of Grey Rock, the same man who once told me, "Your experience is the kind of wisdom this company was built on." I believed him. Until the day I walked into the conference room with a working prototype of Argus in my laptop and realized the meeting wasn't to celebrate a milestone, it was an ambush. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I chalked it up to stress, the long nights, skipped meals, and the relentless pressure of pushing Argus Sentinel to its limits. But when the pain returned night after night, creeping up from the base of my spine and wrapping itself around my abdomen like a tightening vice, I knew it wasn't just exhaustion. After weeks of ignoring the signs, I finally walked into St. Elora Medical Center for what I thought would be a routine checkup. It wasn't. A few scans and blood tests later, the doctor sat me down in a quiet room, his voice steady but low, as he told me I had pancreatic cancer, stage 2. I didn't say much. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the soft hum of the fluorescent light above his head, thinking not about death, but about the code I hadn't finished writing, the firewall logic I still needed to refine, the anomaly patterns Argus hadn't yet learned to detect. And maybe, deep down, I was already grieving something else, the quiet understanding that in the eyes of the corporate world, I had just become a liability. I kept the diagnosis mostly to myself. I told HR enough to account for my medical leave, submitted the required paperwork, and made a quiet arrangement to work from home between treatments. My oncologist warned me that the chemo would come hard and fast. And he was right, it hit like a freight train. There were days I couldn't eat, nights I couldn't sleep, and mornings when I wondered if it was even worth logging on. But I did. Every single day. Not because I was clinging to the job, but because I believed in what I was building, and because I knew that if I stepped away for even a moment, someone else would step in and take it. As my body weakened, the atmosphere around me shifted. Colleagues who used to greet me with warmth began to avoid eye contact. Meetings I was once essential to were suddenly held without me. I would catch whispers behind closed doors, conversations that stopped the moment I entered the room, and a general sense that the future of Grey Rock was being charted without me in it. Ethan, the CEO, barely checked in when he did. It was all smiles and hollow concern, the kind that feels rehearsed, like a line in a script he didn't write himself. It was during one of those sleepless nights, 4 months into chemo, that I first noticed something strange in my system logs. Someone had accessed my development environment after hours, someone with executive level credentials. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some automated scan or IT audit. But when it happened again and again, always just minutes after midnight, I knew this wasn't routine. Someone was watching, someone was digging through my work. That was when everything inside me changed. The man I was, the loyal engineer, the quiet builder, the team player, he began to disappear. In his place stood someone else, someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. I didn't confront Ethan. I didn't report it to IT or HR because I knew where that would lead. A quiet termination, a severance check, and a polite reminder to read section 14.3 of my contract, the one that said anything built with company resources belonged to Grey Rock. Instead, I got to work. I began embedding a series of invisible safeguards deep within Argus, not just to defend against external cyber threats, but to protect it from internal betrayal. I created hidden flags, pattern monitors, and adaptive triggers that would only activate under very specific conditions: unauthorized access, altered user permissions, or a change in core control logic. In other words, I built a trap not out of spite, but out of necessity, because I knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. And sure enough, it came faster than I expected. One rainy Thursday afternoon, I received a calendar invite for a progress review with Ethan and the legal team. I knew the tone. I had seen it used before: polite wording to mask a dagger. Still, I arrived early, laptop in hand, demo ready, wearing the same gray blazer I'd worn during the company's Series A launch 7 years prior, a silent reminder of how far we'd come and how much I had helped build. But when I stepped into that glass-walled conference room and saw not just Ethan, but also Meredith Quinn, the firm's top legal officer, already seated with a contract folder open in front of her, I understood immediately. This wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. The room was cold, not physically, but in the way sterile spaces always are when something deeply personal is about to be taken from you. Ethan didn't bother standing when I entered. He simply gestured toward the seat across from him as if I were just another meeting on his calendar, another item to check off before lunch. Meredith Quinn sat beside him, her fingers steepled over a neat folder labeled Employment Adjustment. Her expression was unreadable, her voice measured as she opened with a phrase I'd come to recognize from years in the industry. Before we discuss Argus Sentinel, we need to clarify a few things about your contractual obligations. I placed my laptop on the table, my hand instinctively hovering above it, though I didn't open it. Something about the air in the room told me it wouldn't matter what I had prepared. Meredith slid a document across the table, not a congratulatory memo, not a patent application, but a legal summary. One that outlined Section 13.6 of my employment contract. All intellectual property developed using Grey Rock Systems resources shall be deemed exclusive property of the company. I had seen clauses like this hundreds of times throughout my career. I knew the language, the loopholes, the way companies blurred the lines between personal innovation and corporate ownership. Still, I had documented everything: the conceptual drafts of Argus I'd written long before I joined Grey Rock, the original designs scribbled on a notepad during my recovery from surgery, the early prototypes built using my own hardware. But none of that seemed to matter now. Ethan leaned forward, his voice as polished as ever, but his eyes held none of the empathy that his words pretended to convey. "Look, Daniel," he began, "we're not here to discredit your work. The board is incredibly grateful for your contribution, and we believe it deserves recognition." He paused, as if waiting for gratitude, then continued, "Which is why we're offering you a one-time payout of $250,000 as part of your transition package. It's a generous figure, well above industry norms." I looked down at the document, the number circled in bold, and felt the bile rise in my throat. $250,000 for 18 months of grueling effort for a system that could easily be worth hundreds of millions. For the sleepless nights, the canceled treatments, the hours spent debugging lines of code while my body begged for rest. And now, they were dressing it up like a gift, like a favor. "Transition package?" I asked quietly. Ethan's tone shifted. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your position at Grey Rock will be dissolved. Security will assist you in collecting your personal items. And of course, the payout will be wired to your account once Argus Sentinel is officially launched." That was the moment I understood the full extent of their plan. They weren't just pushing me out. They were erasing me, repackaging my life's work as a corporate asset, and scrubbing my name from every milestone it had reached. In their eyes, I wasn't a person anymore. I was just another data point to eliminate for efficiency's sake, a dying man with nothing left to offer, who should be grateful for a golden handshake and quietly disappear. But what they didn't realize, what no one in that room could possibly know, was that I had seen this coming, and I had prepared. I nodded, keeping my voice level, suppressing the anger that threatened to break through. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice or demand to see the board. They expected resistance. maybe even hoped for it, something they could use to justify immediate legal action or void the payout altogether. Instead, I smiled thinly and slid my laptop forward. "Of course," I said. "Good luck with tomorrow's investor demo." The look that passed between Ethan and Meredith was brief but telling. They were relieved. They thought they had won. Security walked me back to my office like I was radioactive, polite but firm, never meeting my eyes, their silence louder than any farewell. I packed my things slowly, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to remember the weight of that moment, the feel of the room I had poured myself into for nearly 2 years, the quiet hum of the servers, the flickering green of the monitoring dashboard Argus Sentinel still running in the background, unaware of the storm about to descend. I walked out of Grey Rock's glass doors, carrying a cardboard box like any other corporate cast-off. But unlike most, I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Because buried deep within the code they had just stolen inside the demo they were preparing to showcase was a sequence I had quietly embedded. A line of defense, not for their network, but for mine. And it was set to activate exactly 10 minutes after the investor pitch began. That night, I didn't pace the floor or shout into the void. I didn't call a lawyer or post some bitter screed online or drown my thoughts in whiskey like part of me wanted to. Instead, I did something far more deliberate. I went home, ordered takeout from the same little Thai place I'd been eating from since my first month in Austin, queued up an old sitcom I'd seen 100 times, and waited. The silence wasn't heavy that night, it was purposeful. Because while Grey Rock believed they had removed me from the board, the office, and the system, they hadn't removed me from the equation. 6 months earlier, I had seen enough red flags to know something wasn't right. The unauthorized access logs, the subtle shifts in permissions, the way Ethan would ask questions that were just a little too specific about parts of Argus I hadn't yet made public call of it, told me that trust was no longer part of our working relationship. So I stopped treating Argus like a company asset and started treating it like what it truly was, an extension of myself and one that needed to be protected. And so, beneath the sleek interface, beneath the learning algorithms and predictive frameworks, I began weaving in layers fail-safes, hidden triggers, logic gates buried so deep they couldn't be found unless you knew exactly what to look for. These weren't backdoors in the traditional sense, but more like ethical antibody-estiny fragments of code designed to detect betrayal the way an immune system detects infection. They didn't activate under normal use, and they didn't alert the user. They simply watched, learned, waited. I called them integrity monitors, and their job was simple: observe the system's environment, detect unauthorized administrative changes, and, if breached, initiate a defense protocol. This wasn't sabotage. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. That's why, when I handed over my laptop with a quiet smile and congratulated them on the upcoming investor demo, I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. Because I knew that somewhere inside that very presentation, hidden inside the code Ethan had so proudly claimed as his own, there was a time-triggered command sequence set to go live 10 minutes into the demo. Not to crash the system, not to destroy my own work, but to reveal the truth. And it would begin with a whisper. Not a siren or a dramatic failure, but a quiet cascade, subtle misalignments in the logic chain, false positives flagged against internal nodes, and then, one by one, the security framework would start identifying anomalies not from the outside world, but from within Grey Rock's own network infrastructure. Because Argus Sentinel, for all its complexity, had one core directive: to protect against threats, no matter where they came from. And in its evolving logic, when it detected its own creator had been forcibly removed, it did what it was built to do: it sounded the alarm. So I sat in my living room, laptop closed, TV murmuring in the background, the smell of basil and chili filling the air, and I waited for the phone call I knew would come. It came at 9:38 p.m. Rachel, Ethan's assistant, didn't bother with pleasantries. Her voice was tight, almost mechanical. "He wants to see you. Now, a car is on the way." I didn't ask what had happened. I already knew. I glanced at the clock, smiled to myself, and grabbed my coat. Because while they had spent the last few months planning how to erase me, I had spent the last few decades learning how to be underestimated. And I had made peace with one final truth. When you've been discarded, when you've been betrayed, and when the world thinks you've got nothing left, That's when you're at your most dangerous. Not because you're out for revenge, but because you're finally free to defend what's rightfully yours without fear and without permission. By the time I arrived at Grey Rock's downtown tower, the building felt different tense, like the silence before a storm breaks. I was escorted upstairs by the same security guard who had watched me pack my belongings just days earlier, though now he didn't meet my eyes. The hallway lights felt harsher than I remembered, casting long shadows across the floor as if even the building itself was reluctant to welcome me back. When the doors to the conference room opened, I found Ethan Morrow alone at the head of the table. The polished calm he usually wore like armor had vanished, replaced by the telltale signs of unraveling. His tie was loosened, his shirt half untucked, and the flush in his face hinted not at power, but panic. Papers were scattered across the table, some marked with red ink, others with system printouts, error logs, and something I recognized instantly: Argus Sentinel threat flags. He didn't wait for pleasantries. The moment the door closed behind me, he snapped, "Fix it." I said nothing at first. I took my time walking to the table, placing my bag down slowly, as if I hadn't just been yanked out of bed to rescue the very system he tried to steal. "Fix what exactly?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. He threw a sheet of paper toward me on of the logs. I scanned it briefly, though I already knew what it would show. Thousands of internal threat detections, all aimed inward at Grey Rock's own infrastructure. The AI had triggered a flood of false positives that brought the system to its knees during their demo, and no one in the room had understood why. "The system started flagging random files," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "It crashed mid-demo in front of all 12 investors. It kept identifying internal servers as compromised. Then it pulled files that we didn't even know it had access to. Internal compliance violations, old NDA breaches, access logs from board-level accounts. What the hell did you do?" I raised an eyebrow, not because I was surprised, but because I wanted him to say it out loud. "Argus Sentinel is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It detects threats regardless of where they originate." He stared at me, his eyes narrowing as the realization settled in. "You built it to spy on us?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I built it to protect data integrity. I fed it case studies of breaches, many of them originating from inside the organization. The system learned what betrayal looks like." "You didn't just trigger a glitch, Ethan. You became a threat." His jaw tightened. He started to speak, then stopped himself, pacing to the window before turning back toward me. "You can't prove that. There's no way anyone would believe this wasn't intentional sabotage." I kept my voice even. "I don't need to prove anything. The system logs speak for themselves. Every access attempt, every modified file, every unauthorized change to the architecture since you first tried logging into my private repository, all neatly timestamped, all recorded, all compiled." There was a moment of silence where I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head, not the gears of guilt or remorse, but calculation. He realized that the threat wasn't legal action or some angry ex-employee ranting on social media, but hard evidence that could destroy investor trust, tank the company valuation, and raise questions that no carefully worded press release could smooth over. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice low, resentful, but edged with defeat. I folded my hands. Full recognition as the creator and primary architect of Argus Sentinel. 50% ownership of the IP. A board seat to ensure ethical deployment. And $10 million in compensation for what you tried to take from me. That's extortion. "No," I replied calmly. "That's negotiation. Extortion would be me sending every one of those reports to your investors and the press and walking away." He stared at the table, breathing heavily through his nose, his fingers twitching near the folder of failure logs. Finally, with a slow, bitter exhale, he reached across the table and pulled a chair closer. "Can you fix it before tomorrow's second demo?" "Argus Sentinel doesn't need fixing," I said. "It needs permission." I reached into my bag and placed a flash drive gently on the table. "This contains the proper authentication update. Right now, the system is flagging unauthorized activity because its original creator removed me from the chain of trust. Reintegrate my credentials, and it will stop identifying you as the threat." He looked at the drive like it might explode. "And if I don't?" I gave him a faint smile. "Then you better hope your investors appreciate transparency, because those reports, they'll reach them before your next pitch deck does." He stared at me, silent. And in that silence, I saw what I'd waited months to see, not just fear, but understanding. He finally realized that he hadn't just tried to steal a system, he had tried to rewrite history. But I was still here, and I was writing the ending. The next morning, I returned to Grey Rock. Not as an employee, not as a man quietly pushed out the side door, but as something far more powerful and equal. There was no announcement, no welcome back banner or handshakes in the hallway. Just a single email from the executive assistant confirming my reinstated credentials and a seat reserved for me beside Ethan at the investors' roundtable. I walked through those glass doors the same way I had walked out, head held high. No drama, no spectacle, but this time, the air around me felt different, like the building itself had to recognize I wasn't here to ask for anything. I was here to reclaim what had always been mine. The demo proceeded without incident, or rather, without the kind of incident Ethan had come to dread. Argus Sentinel performed exactly as I had designed it, to clean, efficient, adaptable. It repelled each simulated threat with surgical precision, analyzed in real time, and adjusted its defenses accordingly. The investors were riveted, leaning forward with each test scenario, watching as the system not only identified complex attack vectors, but also predicted their evolution and neutralized them before they could breach. I answered their questions with calm authority, letting my work speak for itself, while Ethan sat beside me with the kind of frozen smile you wear when you're swallowing defeat and calling it partnership. When one of the lead investors, an older gentleman with a Harvard tie and a gaze like he'd seen the rise and fall of 100 startups, asked what had inspired Argus Sentinel's development, Ethan hesitated. For the briefest moment, I could see the flicker of temptation behind his eyes, the urge to reclaim center stage, to rewrite the story one more time. But he didn't. Instead, with a thin smile and a nod toward me, he said, "It was Daniel's vision from the start. Our role was to support that vision and help bring it to scale." The room moved on quickly, but I didn't. I let that moment linger in my mind because I knew how much it had cost him to say it. Not financially, he would still walk away with his stake intact, but emotionally, in that subtle, searing way, men like him are wounded most by having to admit they were not the smartest person in the room. After the meeting, contracts were drafted. I didn't gloat or hammer my victory into every clause. I simply ensured that everything was put in writing. Co-creator recognition, joint patent ownership, a permanent board seat overseeing ethical implementation, and a one-time compensation of $10 million less than what Argus was worth. But enough to make a point. And more importantly, enough to restore the dignity that had been stripped from me, not just as a professional, but as a human being. People asked later why I didn't take them to court, why I didn't drag Grey Rock through a public trial and expose every betrayal in front of a jury. The truth is, I didn't need a courtroom to validate what I already knew. I had built something too powerful, too precise, too forward-thinking to be stolen or silenced. Argus wasn't just a product, it was a testament to what happens when resilience meets purpose. When a man refuses to let illness or age or politics define his legacy. Ethan and I continued to work together, though never as friends. He shifted into a role better suited to his strengths: business development, investor relations, while I led the technical vision. Our meetings were cordial, efficient, and devoid of the artificial warmth that had once disguised ambition as mentorship. We didn't pretend anymore. There was no need. What mattered was this: I had taken the long way back to the seat I should never have been forced to leave. And when I sat down, I didn't just reclaim my title, I reclaimed my voice, my integrity, and my place in a world that had once written me off as too old, too sick, too irrelevant to matter. And this time, no one could take it from me. 3 months after that investor meeting, Argus Sentinel launched its first real-world deployment. A multinational banking network had been under quiet, persistent attack, the kind that slips past firewalls and hides in system logs for months, sometimes years. But this time, the threat was stopped cold. Not only did Argus detect it within seconds, but it neutralized the breach before a single cent was lost. The estimated damages, had it succeeded, were projected north of $300 million. Instead, the headlines praised a new gold standard in cybersecurity. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years prior that wasn't tainted by bitterness. The public launch catapulted Grey Rock Systems into the spotlight, And with it came recognition, press, accolades, and, yes, scrutiny. But I welcome the spotlight, not for fame, but because it forced transparency. As part of our implementation process, I instituted a framework of ethical oversight and human review, not just to prevent misuse, but to ensure Argus would never be weaponized or twisted into something it wasn't meant to be. The system didn't just protect networks, it protected its own integrity, because I had learned the hard way that the greatest danger doesn't always come from hackers or outsiders. It comes from the people who think they're untouchable, the ones who smile while they tighten the noose. Ethan and I remained professional but distant. We shared a nameplate on the company letterhead, but not trust. And that was fine. He no longer held power over Menot in the boardroom, not in the system, and certainly not in the story being told. I didn't need revenge, not in the cinematic sense. What I needed was something more rare and far more valuable: recognition, restoration, and control over my own legacy. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had walked away quietly, if I had accepted that payout and disappeared into the background like so many others my age, written off the betrayal as the cost of doing business in a world that forgets its elders the minute they slow down or fall ill. But I didn't, because something in me refused to believe that 30 years of experience, a lifetime of ideas, and the scars I had earned along the way could be dismissed with a handshake and a check. And if you've been listening this far, maybe you know that feeling too. Maybe you've built something, a reputation, a career, a dream that someone tried to claim wasn't yours. Maybe you felt yourself become invisible in the same place you once gave everything to. Or maybe, like me, you faced a moment when your body failed, your spirit wavered, and the world moved on without you. But here's what I've learned. You don't have to burn the building down to take back what's yours. You don't have to scream or destroy or fight on their terms. You just have to prepare. Think like they never expected you to. Defend what matters to you before they can redefine it. And when the moment comes, when the walls close in and the room falls silent, step forward, not as a victim, but as the one person they underestimated most. Because dignity doesn't come from titles or salaries or applause. It comes from knowing you stood your ground, not out of vengeance, but out of principle. So now, I want to ask you something. If you had been in my position facing illness, betrayal, and erasure, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Or would you have stood up, quietly, firmly, and rewritten the ending? Tell me in the comments. Share your story, your fight, your comeback. I read every single one. Because the truth is, this isn't just my story, it's ours. And if this resonated with you, if you felt seen or heard or simply reminded of your own strength, then follow this channel. There are more stories coming. Stories of resilience, justice, and redemption. Stories that prove it's never too late to take back what was yours all along.